Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move? Hi there, I'm Arlene Battisil, your host and resident provocateur, and I am thrilled to have my very, very special guest on the show today, Mary Shores. She's the founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar business, and this is what's really interesting about Mary, and that is she owns a collection agency, and I know everybody probably goes, ah! when they encounter anybody who's in the collection business. But she's had a very interesting and unique approach to it, and she's managed to collect over $40 million in a way that didn't leave everybody who she was collecting from feeling like shit or that they were going to debtor's prison. Anyways, Mary's recognized as a leader of innovative thought. She spent over a decade teaching businesses and individuals how to inspire others, create new ways of thinking, identify and achieve their goals, and take action to create truly meaningful results. She's the revolutionary founder of the Words That Work system, which inspired her upcoming Hay House book, Conscious Communications, which I love. And Mary travels across the country giving lectures and teaching courses and has been featured on local and national radio and television shows, podcasts, and blogs. And so I am deeply honored to have Mary on the show today. She's a best-selling author, and she's got really, really amazing things to share with us today. And so, Mary, let me welcome you. I'm delighted to have you. And if there's anything I left out of your bio, I love the part about the debt collection because it's so unexpected. And, you know, as I sit here looking at you, and for those of you who are listening to this on the podcast, I am recording this with the video, which will be available on YouTube as well. When you see Mary and you look her up on the internet, you would say, this is not a woman who is in the debt collection business. She looks like this really nice person, and she is. So Mary, welcome. And if you want to add anything to the bio that you'd like everyone to know about you, please feel free. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Arlene. I think you nailed the bio. And to be honest, if I have to listen to my bio one more time, I think I might vomit. So we'll just leave it at what you said.
Brilliant. Okay, we're going to go with that. Now, of course, we're going to have to talk about the debt collection business and the book and so forth. But why don't you talk to me a little bit about where you are today on this very day in terms of what is your world made up of in terms of your work?
You know, it's so interesting, Arlene, because, you know, I am a CEO. I consider myself to be a developmental powerhouse. You know, when you own a business, and if it's a small business, medium business, or a multi-million-dollar business, it's still built on a foundation. And what I want to say is that when I started my business off 20 years ago when I was only 24 years old. I say in those days, I was just a baby debt collector. But the thing is, like, I always built things on a foundation, meaning I always had documented work instructions. And if I had not had that, it would not have allowed me to explore other passions in my life. So, for example, and I know you write as well, so it takes time to write a book. It takes time to get a book deal. It takes time to create a social media following and become an influencer because you have a spreadable message. You have something that's worthwhile to teach to other people. But if you don't have your foundation business set, then you're going to spiral out of control very quickly. So where I'm at now is I've been in this transition period for about 2.5 years, ever since the moment that I signed on the dotted line with Hay House Publishing. So it's a life-changing event and one that I am eternally grateful for. And so where I'm at now is just sort of figuring out my new normal, figuring out the new normal, figuring out what does a day look like, what are my new goals. In fact, I was pulled in so many directions, and I'm sure if your listeners are entrepreneurs, they know exactly this feeling when you have a million ideas and you're pulled in a million directions and you're really not sure what to do, or you're trying to do everything, so you're not really doing anything. So what I did, and I did this very recently at the beginning of the year, was I created something that I'm calling my core four. And the core four simply means where you take 4 areas. This could be of your business, this could be of your life, this could be even for one department in your business. But you just take, what are the 4 main priorities of focus? And what I found was that I started this with my sales department. And what I found was we were focusing on a lot of things that weren't actually sales. So we created the core 4, which is, these are the 4 areas we want to focus on, which, to give you an example, one of them was sales.
Gee, imagine that. Sales in a business?
What a concept. One of them was fully utilizing our branding, making sure that all of our documents are branded. There were some, we were pretty much doing that, but, you could say, take our branding and put it on a proposal and make our proposal look way nicer if it's got our branding on it. Industry involvement, how are we portraying ourselves in our industry and getting involved in the industries that we want to be known in. So those are just some examples. And what I said was, all of our energy needs to be going to these 4 core items. And anything that is not, if we find that we're doing something that we're chasing down a rabbit hole, but it doesn't match up, it's not in alignment with the core 4,
right,
it should raise a yellow flag.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it's in yellow flag mode, then it needs to be a conversation as to why are we doing this? Should it be done at another time? But this has helped me so much. So that's what I'm doing right now, is I am very focused on the things in my core 4 for my personal brand, for my business that I own, as well as for my personal life.
Right. And so now that's very specific to the work that you're doing in your debt collection business, right? And I know you just said that this applies, the core 4 applies in your personal life, but those are things that are really central and essential to your debt collection business, right?
I would say not any more important than the other things. So, for example, I have a core 4 in my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
I have a core 4 for the Mary Shores brand, which is all about like the book and social media and being an influencer. And then for my core business, my bread and butter, I have a core 4 for that business. And then each department actually has their own core 4.
Ah, beautiful.
So you can see this is a multidimensional approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can understand how this works, because a lot of times when I talk to people that I work with, clients or people that I'm mentoring, people who are just starting businesses, the big problem is for them in the early stages is figuring out how to come to market and being distracted by all the things they think they should be doing and all the things they need to build into it. And, I can't leave this out because the consumer needs this. And it's just this piling on of all this shit to try and create what they think is going to be the best product. They never bother to go out and find out whether or not the market even wants what they have to offer. They're just focused on this very specific thing. And what I find is that when you kind of weed through all that crap and just say, okay, what do you need to do today to get to your first revenue event the quickest? It clears everything up. And it seems like, especially for you in a business that is the size that yours is, that you really do need that core 4 because it allows for that focus. Is that something that you have found? And do you think that's a function of the size business that you have? And was that present in the early going when you were building this business?
It has, I may not have named it the core 4, but, because that definition, that clarity of what that is just came to me this year. But I mean, it's always been there, and it is a part of who I am. I mean, the entire first chapter of my book is all about focus. But I think that we hear so many thought leaders, they'll say little taglines like what you focus on grows, or, energy flows where your attention goes. It gets a little silly, right? But it is very true. Okay. But I think that what's lacking a lot of times is teaching people, how do you focus? I mean, even if you go back in the Wayback Machine and you check out books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, you check out books like The Science of Getting Rich, the Napoleon Hill stuff. A lot of those books were written 100 years ago, but they're talking about the same things that we're talking about today. But like what I really like to focus on is, how do you focus? Like, what does that even mean? And how do you use it to your advantage? And so I think that that's been a really strong area of my life. As a matter of fact, I just took the Gallup Strengths quiz.
Yeah.
And, focus is in my top. So I'm just a person that's lucky enough in life to understand how to break apart the concept of focus and apply it to where it creates massive momentum in my projects.
Absolutely. It's interesting you talk about momentum. I mean, it is the momentum that carries us through everything that we're doing. And I was recently at a conference where, one of the speakers was talking about this whole thing about momentum and how everything, you have to really examine everything in your life to determine, okay, is this creating momentum for me or is it actually pulling me back? And you have to eliminate those things that are interfering with your momentum. And have you found either in your business or in writing your book, and when I'm referring to your business in this conversation today, I'm talking more about your debt collection business. In that business or in the writing of your book, have you experienced periods of time where you felt there was this huge drag on your momentum? And if so, what did you do to regain that momentum?
So my entire life, my entire business, my entire universe is based on this concept that you're talking about. I mean, I would use a different language because I like to make things super, super simple. So it actually, chapter five of Conscious Communications is called To Cleanse or Clog, That Is the Question. And this is a simple concept, okay? So really what it's talking about is that everything you say, everything you do, every word that comes out of your mouth, every action you take, every choice you make in the thinnest slice moments of life is either creating a deeper connection or it's driving a disconnection. So going back to your question, like, I measure everything in terms of it's either getting us closer to what we want or it's moving us farther away. So everything is a cleanse. Everything is a clog. It's one or the other. But this also doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. Like I've got an 80-20 rule built into this where, if 80% of the time I'm making choices that are always connecting me to my goals or my desires in life or in business, then that will lead me to ultimate success. Right. That allows me room that I can still flub up 20% of the time and screw it all up, and I will be okay as long as 80% of the time I'm hitting my mark. Now, what's interesting about that is that is actually what became the foundation and how I built out the Words That Work system, which is the reason why I have the most unique collection agency on the planet. So if you take that concept and I say, everything I say in a conversation, everything I say, everything I do with that consumer, that person who owes money on the phone, is either going to create a connection with them or it's going to drive a disconnection. Because the entire mission of my business is that I want people to feel good about paying their debt, because having a debt is a psychological burden. Right. And it's a burden that gets in between people and living the life of their dreams. And, years ago, if I were to go, when I was a baby collector, I really wanted to take more of a sales approach, but Arlene, it actually wasn't working. Like you would think, and especially doing what you do, you would think that a sales approach would work, but it really doesn't. In the debt collection space, it was not working for me in that time period of the early 2000s, because we had the rising housing market bubble. FHA had changed some of the requirements to get a mortgage, and consumers were no longer required to pay their debt in order to get a mortgage. So that completely wiped out my leverage. So I thought what I needed to do was sell them on the idea of paying a debt. It was a good idea, but it didn't work out in the end, because you know why? Because it didn't touch the real issue, which is the shame and unworthiness that we have in this country and the stigma over debt. That is the wound that I needed to work on. And so I really understood that if I studied words, I could figure out how to communicate in a way that made people feel good about the fact that they actually care about paying this, instead of keeping them swirling in that chaos of shame, uncertainty, and unworthiness. And that is my huge shift that changed everything for my business. But not only that, it became the foundation for my entire life.
Right. And what's really interesting about what you just said, and this is what was really resonating with me, and I talk about this all the time about how you sell. And the way you sell is through stories. That's the way most people, that's how we communicate in the world. We tell stories to one another. And within those stories are emotions. And people buy based on emotions. They use their logic to justify what it is that they want to buy. And if you apply this idea that if you're trying to make a connection with someone, an emotional connection that reduces their barriers, that reduces their objections, they are much more open to hearing what you have to say. They trust you more. They feel like you're actually an ally. And then you're able to bring them along to a point where they actually do buy. And I find it fascinating that you have found a way to apply that same thing in the business of debt collection, because, for anybody who's ever been through, the process of having debt collectors contact them, the historical approach has always been they're just going to berate you and beat you up and harass you constantly and calling you and create so much pressure that they think that that is somehow going to get the job done. And I would think that historically it probably did get the job done. And I also think that there were a lot of people who committed suicide as a result of that approach, because you've got people under so much pressure at that point. And to your point, they're experiencing so much shame and humiliation around the fact that they are in that situation. And sometimes it's through their own doing, and other times it's not. It's through none of their own doing. You could have had a big job with a big paycheck and had a mortgage, and then you lose all of that and you lose your house and everything that it's just the shitstorm that hits you. And in your business, by using this approach, the more gentle approach, the approach where you make that connection with people, at the point that you made that shift in your business, what did that do to your revenue?
Our revenue went up 34% in the first year alone.
Yeah, there you have
and, it was hugely impactful. So that was I started doing that. This was in 2005 when I very first began figuring this out. And it's so interesting, the parallels between what you're talking about and what I'm doing, because to me, it's all based on neurology. Like the human brain has certain check marks inside of it. And it's like, you can't move to solution phase until you have been through these other phases first. So, creating that connection, building that trust, building rapport, understanding that this has to happen first, step one, before you can go on to step two, I do believe is effective, whether it's sales, whether it's collections, whether it's on a date, whether it's with your children, whether it's, it's everything in life. And even I've taken those concepts and said, well, how are you cleansing or clogging your finances? It's the same concept that can be repeated infinitely in any area of life. How are you cleansing or clogging your mindset, your health? Health is a big one, because I think that that's easy to visualize, that we know if I am putting an apple into my body, I know instinctively, I don't have to Google it, that an apple has nutrients that are beneficial for my body. That's a cleanse. This is how simple this is. That's a cleanse. If I am, however, putting a Snickers bar into my body, again, I don't need to Google it, that's a clog. I don't need to, I just instinctively know these things. Well, we also instinctively know this about other human beings, that if I say this thing, what's going to trigger your spouse. What's going to trigger your coworker. You have a choice to make in each and every moment of your life of how you're going to build that next frame of your life.
Right. It's so amazing how simple this is and what a shortcut it is, because there's actually no judgment there. And I think just in life and in what you were just saying about how we communicate with people, we know what triggers the people that are in our lives. We know what triggers us. And why would you be interacting with someone in a way that's going to further take them away from you or away from what you want from them or from what you want them to do, when if you just change the way you talk to them, you're actually going to get what you want. And it's so fascinating to me that people spend so much time communicating in ways that create the clog instead of create the cleanse. And they do it there so often. People are, it's like the title of your book. It's conscious communication. It's about being deliberate and thoughtful about the interaction you're about to have with someone. And why would you go into any interaction and have it turn into a shit show? It happens in relationships all the time. And I never get it. Because it's like, why do you want to have a relationship where you're fighting with somebody all the time? You know what triggers that person? Why are you going to say shit to them that's going to make them have a meltdown? And now you're having a big fight. And now you're talking about getting divorced. What's wrong with you?
Do you want me to tell you why?
Go, yeah, please.
Because we have neural networks and pathways in our subconscious brain that is dictating our behavior all the time. I mean, you and I, Arlene, we could take this into a philosophical conversation about free will, and I'd be happy to do that with you someday, but let me keep it simple. The other day I was getting a massage, and when I got off the table, I wanted to use the restroom. Mm-hmm. And I walked into the restroom and I turned the light on. And then I said to myself, why did I turn the light on? It's not dark in here. She's got a big window, right? And there was plenty of light. I didn't see any better because I turned the light switch on. Yeah. The reason I turned the light switch on is because 99% of the time when I walk into a bathroom, there are no windows in that bathroom. And so it is an automatic.
Yep.
I automatically turned that light on. Okay. I didn't think about it. It's not like I said, is turning this light on going to cleanse or clog me? No, it was an automatic program. So what I'm proposing is that the majority of our lives, and we know this now through neuroscience, is really ran on these automatic programs. Okay. Our body, our subconscious works like a well-oiled machine. Yeah. And trigger A is going to cause B, C, D to happen every single time. And so the reason why we don't do these things that seem so simple and obvious is because all of our subconscious programming is already set. And in order to make a change, in order to have a transformation in one of these areas that you would like to change, then the key is you need to say, who installed the program? Mm-hmm. And that's what needs to change. You have to kind of trace it back. And then you got to say what needs to change is the program.
Yeah.
Because just as much as you know your spouse is always going to react at a level 10 when you say thing A, there's a reason why you are compelled to say thing A. There's a reason why, and that's not as easy to change. But what I find is that once you have the awareness, and this is what my book is really about, is to understand that we are the ones with the power.
Right.
We are the ones that can empower ourselves in every moment of life. And once you understand the intelligence behind how our subconscious works, and you pick a modality that this is what I'm going to use to try to program it the way I want it to work. Mm-hmm. Right? I want it to work. And it's not about light switches. Okay. It's about getting what you want out of life. Yeah. Right. And one of my stories that I like to use to teach this is like my own story. And I think that a lot of thought leaders, I feel like they use esoteric terminology like alignment.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the heck? What are you talking about? You made me want to pull my hair out, because like I'm a super practical person and I need to understand this from like, okay, that's nice. How do I do it?
Right.
So like, here's my own little story. I, for 10 years, had went around saying, I want to write a book because I just felt this need to write a book. And I would go around to anyone who would listen to me and I would say, I want to write a book, but I'm not a writer. Mm-hmm. And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because words are like a mirror to our subconscious.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
So when you hear me say the words, I want to write a book, it's almost like you can see that written on my soul, that this is what I came here to do. But see, I have a big problem when I'm following that up with, but I'm not a writer. Right. And it's not about writing, because how many times do we say, I want to start a business, I want to do this, I've got this big vision, but I XXX.
Yeah.
or ABC, whatever it is. And so boom, there's the awareness, because also the words that I'm not a writer are also revealing something from my subconscious programming, that somewhere, somehow I am running a program that tells me I don't have the ability to write a book.
Right.
Okay. And so that's what I needed to change. So how do you change it? And and by the way, there's a million bajillion ways to change it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, you have to do it my way. I can just share what worked for me, So one of the things that I know works is for me to invest in myself. So boom, because by the way, every time I'm saying the words, but I'm not a writer, what I'm doing is I'm actually strengthening that neural network in my subconscious that created the belief in the first place. So the moment I invested in myself and I went to a writer's workshop in New York at Omega Institute, that plants sort of a seed in the garden of your mind.
Right.
And that is the beginnings of a new budding neural network that leads me to change the belief. Right. And I really needed to do that. And I needed to have that evidence. So for example, when I went to the workshop and I actually wrote my first story, which was about my daughter who passed away in 1993 from a traumatic brain injury at birth. It was about raising my son as a single mother who's on the autism spectrum, and just what it's like living a very lonely existence with a child that has no rule book. And also comparing both of those things in contrast to my roller coaster journey as an entrepreneur and an extremely successful entrepreneur. And at the end of that class, when I read that story to the class, Arlene, no one laughed at me. No one told me I wasn't a writer. Yeah. And everyone did the opposite of that. They encouraged me. They wanted my story. They came up to me in tears. I was able to move these people to tears with my story. Right. And so my brain, my subconscious saw the evidence that it needed, which could then change my belief, which then changes my thoughts, which then changes my words. And when my words change, I'm strengthening that neural pathway in the subconscious. And then boom, 3 years later, I have a published book. Now, I tell you that story because that was a really long story with a lot of words in it. But
I loved every minute of it.
But can't you see the power that we're talking about? So that is alignment. That is getting my thoughts, my words, my beliefs, the way I feel about it, and the actions I'm taking, all moving, all creating the connection to what I want.
Right. Absolutely. And as you were talking, Mary, I was thinking about, when you're talking about the neural networks, most people don't speak in that kind of language because, we don't really think about our neural networks just as part of our everyday language, but because they are operating in every moment of our life, it really is important to think about this. And as you were talking, I was thinking about people who suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder, where what's actually happening for them, and this applies to every one of us, and I'll say why in a second. When someone's suffering from OCD, they're actually stuck in one of those neural pathways. They're in this rut, and they can't get out. They can't back out. They can't go forward. All they do is they repeat the same behavior over and over and over again.
Almost like a skipping record or CD.
Yes. It's just skipping over and over and over again. But what it's doing further is it's digging that rut even deeper. And if you can think about it in that way with people who have OCD, you can see it instantly. Oh, they're stuck. It is this broken record. It keeps going. And the behavior manifests in this repetitive behavior that is really harmful to them, and they suffer tremendously. And that's in the extreme. But, when we think about relationships and we're upset about something and we're ruminating about it and we can't let it go. And, how many times when you're in a relationship with someone and you don't understand why they're doing something. And so then you're just processing the hell out of it. And you actually cannot stop yourself from doing it. You are actually stuck in a rut in one of those neural pathways. And what you said, which is so critical, is the words that you're using in those moments are either going to send you further down that pathway and digging that rut even deeper, or it's going to pull you back out of it. Because once you hit, one of those neural pathways where there's actually a dead end and you just keep bumping into that dead end, there's nowhere for you to go down that pathway. You're stuck there and you have to find a way to pull yourself back out. And this is where, as you say, the conscious communication, the words that we're using, and conscious communication even applies to how we're communicating with ourselves. Would you agree?
Yeah, that would be the original premise of the book, is to understand that our words are what we can use to change our mind, our choices in our life. So, definitely it's an interpersonal aspect of it. And, what you're talking about with OCD is also the same for post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, absolutely.
That people are stuck in the story. And I think that empowerment is a big buzzword right now. And that's lucky for me, because I'm queen of empowerment. So, a lot of people get super fascinated because I had this child at this young age and I was able to turn it around and start a business at a pretty tender age of only 24. But the thing is, I tell people all the time, one of the ways that you need to empower yourself is to loosen the grip on the tragic stories that we tell. Because every time you're telling that story, think about it. You go to a cocktail party, women meet other women, we bond with each other over our stories. And I'm not suggesting to abandon your story, because your story is what has built your character in your life, right? And so stories are very important. That's kind of what we started talking about in the beginning. But it's also to realize that the powerful part of the story, the empowering part of the story, the most beautiful part of the story lies within the moment that you moved on. It's in that moment where you figured it out. Because if you can focus on that part of the story, it's going to do some things in your brain. First of all, every time you do it, you're strengthening a neural network that is in the problem-solving sector of the brain versus keeping you in a victimhood mentality. So we all know people that have this sort of victimhood as almost like a blueprint of their life. But we all know also people who seem to be very resilient, like Oprah Winfrey, right? So what makes that person resilient? I was actually just featured in a documentary called the Global Resilience Project that she chose 50 people from around the globe that she wanted to study on this research project for resilience. And what are the common themes that each person uses in their own strategy? And she definitely found a theme. Anyway, I could go off on a tangent for that for hours, but I just think that we're continuing to agree with each other.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, Mary, let me shift gears for a minute, because, I'm sure at the moment that you said the words, "my daughter died," everybody who's listening to this went, and felt it right in their gut, especially if they're a parent. And if you're okay with it, I'd like to go back in time to the moment that happened and the other things that happened in your life just with your son, and its relationship to how you began to understand these things, and then what your next move was, what you decided to do with the understanding you came to, and how it's led you to where you are today.
So, yeah, I'll be happy to talk about that. And I'll tell you that truly and honestly, the bigger impactful moment of my life was actually my divorce. So if you want to circle back around on that one, we can talk about it as well.
Why don't we start with that?
So, okay. So I'll briefly tell you with my daughter. My daughter was born, I was 19 years old, and she had lack of oxygen at birth for over 5 minutes. And so she was born with a profound level of brain damage. Now, what this looks like is she was blind, she was deaf, she was unable to swallow. So she did not have a suck reflex. So she had to have a gastronomy tube inserted into her stomach in order to have nutrients. Now, I'm a 19-year-old girl. I'm a baby myself.
Of course.
And here I am. I'm she lived her first few days on life support. She was actually not expected to live, but she did live for a year and a half. And during that time, I was administering very scary medication, phenobarbital, morphine.
Oh my God.
I mean, things that like I got even one like 0.0005 too much, it could end her life. So it was a state of constantly living in fight or flight for me.
Right.
And it did create a profound amount of post-traumatic stress. The shock really was in the moment she was born more than when she passed away. I think that I was too young and naive to realize that she was always terminal. I think that I really believed that she could heal. I did not understand. It's such a great, profound question to ask me because it really was one of the first things that happened in my life where I became obsessed with the brain.
Of course. It makes perfect sense.
Right. So you can see where that was a moment where I was going to the library. I was obsessed with how to heal her brain. And I learned all kinds of things probably 30 years before the rest of us did, like the power of stem cells. I mean, things that are just now coming out, I knew about in 92 and 93.
Now, Mary, can I ask you one question about that? Did you feel in the attempt to learn everything you possibly could about this, that was in some way allowing you to get control of the situation or control of just how you were feeling about the situation and responding to it?
I'm sure that it did, because that is a pattern that I have is, definitely liking, I feel like in life, I like to understand things inside, outside, backwards, and forwards.
Yeah.
And so being in a situation that I can't control, definitely information is power. So I wanted to empower myself as much as I possibly could. So, but living in the children's hospitals, I had nothing. I had no resources. I slept on the emergency room floors. I saw things that you can never unsee in life. And here right away, when you say, what is your next move? Right away, it's this, I could have stayed there. I could have, when she passed away, I could have stayed there. I could have let that story become a foundation of tragedy. And I think that I didn't choose that. When she passed away, I probably numbed out. I realize now that I spent a lot of time blaming myself. Like I could have been better. I mean, I don't even have words necessarily to put to it, but what I can tell you is that I also felt like I had this new chance. It felt like, that I could now do something different with my life. And so I did go on to start a business. But there was a lot of things that happened along the way. I didn't exactly start my business from a place of empowerment, Arlene. If I'm being really honest, I started my business originally because I now was a college dropout. I did not feel like I could measure up to, like, I thought if I went and got a job, I would probably not have the same earning potential as my peers who had college degrees.
Right.
So, when you become a teenage mom, this is a byproduct of it. This is something that you have to deal with.
Right.
And so I actually started a business because I felt like a loser. And I thought we go right back to this control, right?
Yeah.
But I thought, well, at least if I own my own business, I'll be able to keep the profit and I will have more freedom. Someday when I have a family, I'll have more freedom to live my life the way that I wanted to. And so isn't that interesting that I'm not going to sit here and say I did that out of empowerment. Actually, I did it from the opposite.
Yeah.
But I became empowered as part of the process.
Yeah, it's a byproduct of it. And what's really interesting is you said that you could have just stayed in that place, but instead you made the decision to do something. And sometimes doing anything is better than staying in the place that we're at in the moment, because the moment is so deeply and profoundly painful. And it's the kind of moment that can suck you into a place, especially with the loss of a child, or even what happened when your child was born, that you find yourself in a place of such desperation and despair and no hope. And even what hope you have, there are no answers out there that are suggesting anything other than something that is the last thing you want in the world. And having your next move being any move is like you've climbed, Mount Everest, because you've taken that step and it's actually propelled you forward, which in that moment you had to propel yourself forward out of that moment to survive. Would you agree?
I would. And I would say that that's a beautiful explanation. Oftentimes I say, if you just take one step in a new direction, and that doesn't mean it's an empowered step, because oftentimes, my journey through life has not been a graceful one.
Yeah.
I mean, I can sit like I think that there could be an image that I'm at the top of my game, but if I'm really being honest, my journey's been an uncomfortable one.
Yeah.
But it's through those uncomfortable moments that I've grown and expanded the most. And so understanding that, like, and this might sound a little woo-woo, but I believe that if I take one step in a new direction, the universe, God, or whatever you believe, sort of meets you halfway.
Yeah.
And through some sort of hidden force of a synchronicity, you end up being in the right place at the right time.
Right.
You end up having the opportunity come to you. It's like 3 parts hard work sometimes, and 1 part, but the hard work that you're doing, it's that pushing yourself through the uncomfortable moments. It's understanding that everything you do is making you stronger, is building that well of wisdom.
Yeah.
And I guess I had a lot of wisdom at a very young age.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I have to laugh when you said, this is going to sound maybe a little woo-woo. Because I can completely relate. I never call it woo-woo. I just call it, well, this is how I see shit in life. And that is that, it's almost this cosmic thing that if you, like, to whatever extent you believe in this shit, I actually believe this, that if you actually trust the universe enough to take the step, to accept the uncertainty, to give up the control or recognize that you have no control, and you take one step forward through a door, any door in life, whatever it is, if you take that one step, the universe is going to reward you. It's just that we don't trust that that's what's going to happen. And yet it does every single time.
And I love that. It goes right back to the concept of your show. What's your next move? So like, for example, I mean, when I went to that writer's workshop, I wasn't thinking to myself, I'm going to have a best-selling book. I wasn't thinking of that. I was just doing the next intuitive hit, which was go to this writer's workshop with an open mind and just see what happens. And
oh my God, I love that so much, because it is reflective of how you actually have success in life, because it's the path of least resistance, because our biggest resistance comes when we plan every last fucking detail and none of the plan works out. And so I just say, why are you planning anything? Just figure out what your next move is and then see what happens. So nobody wants to do that. No, I've got to have a strategic plan. I've got to put this in place. There are all these things I have to have control, as if we actually ever have control over anything, which is just like so not true.
Well, it's exactly the same thing as the light switch. We're programmed.
Yeah.
We are programmed to believe. I mean, and it's depending on what generation you come from, it is all that, go to high school, get your diploma, go to college, get the career, get the job, get the house, get the marriage, get the kids, get the divorce, have your crisis, start over. We're programmed for certain cultural beliefs.
Right.
And so I think that I've had things that have happened in my life that have completely shaken me at my core, that has forcibly removed me from that cultural programming. So even though that was not an easy thing to do, I'm so grateful for it now, because I don't believe in any of that shit anymore.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
don't even care. In fact, I would take it as far as like circling right back to the fact that I'm a debt collector. But my core belief is money is like a made up thing.
Yeah.
We made it up. It doesn't even mean anything. You can't even put like the principles of physics to it. Like it's not a thing.
Right.
It's a game, like playing Monopoly. And the way you play Monopoly is through a strategy.
Right.
And so money sort of, I don't have the same attachment that a lot of other people do. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it allows me to be so compassionate towards other people, is because I can also allow them to see that you are not a bad person because you owe money.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You know, and even if they owe money through their own bad choices, they're programmed to make those choices.
Mm-hmm. You know, let me ask you, the word that you used, compassion, it's probably my favorite word in the English language. And talk to me a little bit about how you discovered compassion. What was the point in your life where compassion became something that was really an active part of how you lived?
Well, I'm probably a naturally empathic person, so I have a feeling it's something that's always been there. You know, there might be places where I've connected the dots between this and that. So one of the things that I'm really talented at is making those kind of connections.
Right.
So, for example, understanding that people are really trying to do the best they can in life.
Yeah, they sure
and
are.
There's very few people on the planet that are intentionally doing harm, even though we sort of build ourselves up to believe that.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes right into that. How can you trust the universe when we're constantly being programmed to not trust anything? Don't trust the doctors.
What a great point.
Don't trust the government. Don't trust the school system. Don't trust anything.
Yeah.
Everyone's out to get you, dog eat dog world, those kind of things. And I guess my belief is that each and every one of us is creating our own circumstances.
Yeah.
And so and I think that my connection with other people is and this might not be exactly what you're looking for, but the absolute thrill I get in helping other people wake up to that reality. Yeah. And I must have some compassion in there, or else why would I care what other people do?
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. Now, you did mention the divorce as having had a huge impact. Can you walk me through that a little bit?
Yeah. And I'll tell you too, the reason the divorce had a bigger impact is because it was unexpected. So clearly with my daughter, it's not the same. If you lose a child because they got into an accident, that is a different type of trauma than what I really like to be upfront about that. But my divorce, I did not see coming. And so because
how long were you married at that time?
I was married 10 years. And I had 2 small children, and my marriage was the foundation of everything in my life. I mean, I loved my husband more than life itself. And so his behavior began to change about 2 years prior to our divorce. And I think I was always wanting to work on things, but after that, I was left so completely and profoundly shattered. I was at the darkest place of my entire life. Right. And I literally had a vision of myself that I was going to die penniless bag lady. And I thought I could skate on my business for a couple of years until the money runs out. But what was happening inside my brain is that I was in such a post-traumatic situation. Yeah. And I understand now that I had had other traumatic situations happen to me probably this was the last straw that I could handle. Mm-hmm. And so I checked out for 2 years, 2 complete years. From 2008 until 2010, I was like living in this vegetative state of a broken person. I would go to work, but nobody could really interact with me. I had to have gatekeepers all around me. I couldn't even form thoughts. I couldn't make decisions. I just was this vegetable that lived in a constant state of overwhelm and stress.
Right.
In fact, when I talked about this, I would say that I felt like I was always walking down a flight of stairs and that somebody was coming, kicking the stairs out from underneath me. And so it just felt that way, like this free fall of despair.
Mm-hmm.
And I through again, through luck and support of the universe, or whatever you want to call those hidden forces,
Mm-hmm.
I had made some decisions prior to my divorce that really supported me through this. One was that my brother came to work at my office.
Mm.
And so, this was something that really saved me during this time. And the other was that for the first time, I had hired an executive assistant.
Oh, God.
So this actually happened a couple of years right after we had that burst of our revenue jumping up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a really interesting, it was interesting because I was at the top of my game, and I went from the top to, we're talking like, not even the basement, like lower than the basement. I was in Mordor. So,
right.
Anyway, after about 2 years, I started to feel this shift inside my mind, like the fog started to clear, and I would say the words, I would say, I know I'm going to do something different. I just don't know what it is. Like I had this feeling that something inside me was bubbling up. And then all of a sudden ideas started coming back to me. And I used to describe it like this. I used to say, I feel like the back of my head is opening up and something is just shoving information or downloading information. And the interesting thing is that when I made my comeback,
mm-hmm.
I made a comeback where I was 100 times stronger than I had ever been before. Yeah. So the ideas that were coming to me were like brilliant on another level. Right. When I would have an idea or a strategy or something in business, it was almost like the end result downloaded with every single step of how to get there along the way, all mm-hmm. in the same moment.
Yep.
I would be spitting these things out, and people had a hard time even keeping up. So it came back so quickly and overnight. And this started in around 2010. And I do talk about this kind of stuff in the book because they talk about this a lot with like lottery winners that like you have this sort of happiness set point. Mm-hmm. And you return to that, right. So like if you were unhappy before you won the lottery, you'll be happy for a couple of years, but then you'll go right back to your miserable, pathetic existence, right?
Right.
Whereas they also say the same thing about people who become paraplegics, mm-hmm. that they will have this like 2-year period and then they eventually return. Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I had it was 2 years and I eventually started to feel normal again, but my new normal came back into this almost like if you take the shattered pieces of a mirror and you put them together, the facets, you're going to have millions of facets of light,
right,
that are more reflective than the original piece ever was. And that's what I experienced.
Wow. What a tremendous image, and the way that you've portrayed it, where many people could look at that. And I think they stop at the shattered glass and that it's just shattered. And yet you see it as the pieces being put together that are reflecting the light in 1,000 different ways, much like the many facets of a diamond, that it's just shining and sparkling and the brilliance of it all. And that it actually is all put back together again, but it's been rearranged in a way that I really believe in life. These things that happen to us are the necessary rearranging that must occur for us to actually grow into who we are ultimately supposed to become. Because how else can you become or come into the fullness of your being unless you're tested, unless you're brought to your knees, unless you strip away every single thing that is your sense of who you are, where all of the stories that you've told yourself, and my favorite line from our entire conversation today is about loosening the grip on the stories you tell yourself. Like you were in a marriage for 10 years and the whole thing was just pulled out from under you, and you had a story that you were telling yourself about being in that relationship and what your life was and how you saw the world and yourself in it. And it was a picture, and then it was completely shredded. And then you wove all the pieces back together into something that became who's sitting in front of me talking to me here today, where you've got this best-selling book, you've got this phenomenally successful debt collection business, and most important, a perspective that has come out of your life experience that you've been able to knit together in a way that you're able to share so beautifully and brilliantly with other people that ultimately helps them. I mean, what better life could come out of all of that than the one that you have?
It's so true. And you just nailed it. Everything. You just nailed it. That it's so true. And more recently, I've been talking to entrepreneurs a lot about purpose, because I'm finding with the younger generation, their need to make an impact is very important to them. So I grew up as a Gen Xer, which is more all about making the money.
Yeah,
becoming successful, achieving. But this millennial generation, and I do believe that the Gen Z behind them, their need to ultimately make an impact is at the core of their being.
Yeah, I do.
And purpose has shifted to this thing where it's like what you just described, that purpose is like this elusive thing behind a curtain. Mm-hmm. And I feel a tremendous responsibility to say there are some shortcuts. Like, you can live on your path. You can follow your purpose without going through some of those heroes' journeys.
Right.
And the way that you can do that is to understand what your natural skills, gifts, and talents are. Mm-hmm. And that the more you feed those particular strengths, the more you are living on your right path, the more things start to exponentially come to you. So, like, as an example, when I discovered this, which was not until like after my breakdown with my ex-husband and all of that, was I decided I wanted to take a more spiritual path in life. And that became extremely important to me. And I was very worried, Arlene, because like, how was I going to go on this path of self-actualization or enlightenment if I'm a debt collector? It seemed very incongruent. And I was, yeah.
I can see how you might have that question.
Right. And so it really felt like I was terrified that I was going to have to give up my career. Yeah. And this is really in a moment where I realized, wait a second, part of my mission is my career because of what I'm doing. And what I need to do is I just need to take my skills, gifts, and talents, which for me is writing, teaching, and public speaking, and apply that to my career. And the moment I realized to do that, I had another huge expansion. If I had my Hoberman sphere here, I would make it go like this to do on camera.
Yeah.
But like, I had this another huge expansion and shift. And now I'm like teaching other debt collectors to do what I do. I'm trying to make an impact in my industry, because what I can see my life shifting to is moving into a space where it's total debt detox time.
Right.
And so, but to kind of give, especially maybe some of the younger viewers, a shortcut to that is like, feed your talents. Stop trying to overcome your weaknesses. Feed your talents. And even if that's just through volunteering or just applying it to your current job, because I'm not trying to tell people go out and quit your job tomorrow and become an entrepreneur, because believe me, that's not the right decision always. But, just feed your talents and just see where it leads you.
Right. I just looked at the clock and I thought, okay, how did that much time go by that quickly? Because I have, maybe about 395,000 more questions I want to ask you. So I'm racing through my head right now to figure out the last couple of things I want to ask you before we wrap it up, because there are so many things here that I would love to explore further with you. And I guess one thing I would like to walk through with you is, how is it now when you go back to when you had the experience with your daughter and you having to just like becoming a voracious consumer of all of this information about the brain, but you've come to a lot of other conclusions about many things, especially around communication, that ultimately have ended up in the book. What would you attribute your coming to this understanding at this point in time in life? You now have a way of looking at things and looking at people and looking at communication. I mean, that has come from some very specific experiences in your life. And can you just talk a little bit about how, what were the things that, if you can just sort of give me a brief overview of what were the things that you think were most central to you coming to this understanding of how words make such a huge difference in our communications and in the impact that ultimately led to the contents of your book?
I think it is an absolute path that I'm on this, mission to pursue. I feel like the initial seed was probably my daughter. Mm-hmm. I believe that one of my natural skills, gifts, and talents is just as a person that's articulate. Mm-hmm. So one of the first things, believe it or not, was I was a telemarketer years and years and years ago, like 30 years ago. And I understood early on how just little word shifts or little tonality changes would lead to a sale. So there was that. But when I look back, it's interesting when you look back on your life and you can see how it was perfectly orchestrated for you. One of the bigger things, Arlene, was raising a child on the spectrum.
I was thinking about that very thing. So, because you're communicating. I mean, the way you communicate with a child who's on the spectrum is not the way anyone else communicates. So you get a whole different way of understanding how communication works.
It's so true. But the truth is, like, the autism is a disorder of the nervous system. It is a neurological disorder, and it's an overprocessing of everything in the nervous system. Right. But it's actually very reflective of our time and space in today's culture, because we're actually all overloaded in our nervous systems. Mm-hmm. We all have constant notifications going off. We have overbooked ourselves. We've teched our lives out to the point of it's inconvenient. It's supposed to be convenient, but it's not. We are not allowing ourselves the natural space to decompress or detox our nervous system. Mm-hmm. And so we're all sort of walking around triggered, almost like we're walking around in these ticking time bombs. And so there are words that will further trigger that, or there's also the opposite, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. Yeah. And so understanding that words can trigger that more parasympathetic part. It's kind of like when you said you need to get them feeling this before we get to feeling this. Right. And so I'll leave it at that with you, and suggest we should follow up with an encore show to discuss, to further explore all the rest of your 390 million questions.
That's brilliant. Well, Mary, thank you so very much. I seriously do have many more questions, and I think just it would be worth having another conversation just to talk more specifically about the contents of the book, because I think that my listeners would be very, very interested in hearing you talk more about that. Now, just as we wrap it up, can you let our listeners know where they can find you and what they can find from you?
Yes. So, and also a lot of this stuff is in the book. So I love, one of the things I love about the book is using a story to make a point.
Yeah, for sure.
So I love doing that. My biggest ask to find me, if the first thing is, if you go on Amazon, if the conversation today resonated with you in any way, shape, or form, check out the book Conscious Communications. I always say, if you just read the description and maybe a handful of reviews, you'll know absolutely right away if this is the book for you. And if that is, I'm thrilled. And if it's not, and you want to just catch up with me on social media, a great way to do that is in my Facebook group, which is called Fearless Ambition. And also, aside from that, I'm easy to find through the name Mary Shores, Shores, through my website, www.maryshores.com. And of course, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of those things. So I'm happy to connect with any of you listening today. I love answering questions. And my book, that's like again, my biggest dream in life come true is this book.
Oh, that's magnificent. And I would encourage everyone to pick up a copy because it's a really magnificent book and I think is really helpful on so many levels, both on the personal level and the professional level. And I guess as we wrap it up, Mary, are there any last thoughts that you would leave with our listeners just about the kind of challenges that they face in life and, you know, the whole business of what's your next move?
I'm so glad you asked. So I'm going to read just a short excerpt.
Oh, excellent.
This goes along perfectly with the show today and what you just asked. So this is off page 158. I know it's easier said than done, but what if, as an experiment, you tried to be happy just by becoming who you really are, just living it and stepping into it? To get to who you really are, you have to shed layer after layer of who you've been pretending to be, layers of the person that you know deep down you are not. You're shedding layers of your problems, layers of self-judgment, layers of how others have judged you, shedding layers of unworthiness, fear, worry, and unnecessary responsibilities. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, my jaw just dropped on the ground. That was magnificent. I think that's something that people could screenshot from your book and carry around with them on their phones because it's such a magnificent statement and really does encapsulate everything in terms of how people can be looking at their life to live in the fullness of who they truly are. Mary, this has been just one of the best hours I've spent with my show to date, and I appreciate your time so much. I know you're incredibly busy with everything that's going on, so I'm so honored that you joined us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arlene.
I'll look forward to seeing you again here. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed that today, and as I always end each show, when you think about your life and where you're at, you just always ask yourself, what's your next move? I'm Arlene Battisil. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back with another episode. Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move?